All right.
pause and briefly for a few more checks.
Sure, sure. Um, when do you want me to stop talking? Do you want to like send up a flare or wave at me, or do you want to like
Let's see.
talk for a certain time and then
Most
questions?
students will leave at around 2
Right.
to get to the next class. So if we leave, if you start at around 1:40, 1:45, so we can have some
Okay.
question time.
Okay. Great.
Is the mic on? Yes, it is.
Apparently it is.
So,
I'll try not to bang it on a regular basis.
or, do your closest.
That's right. I'll stand back. Stand back. So these look familiar faces, are they mostly your students, do you think? Or?
Yeah. The most intelligent people in the room are all in my class.
Wow. Okay. And so they're all hardcore urbanists, all hardcore
They're
historians.
hardcore students and they're in the process of becoming hardcore urbanists. And Lloyd is Harvard,
Hello.
who is a scholar. Okay, so he's one of your appreciative fans.
Oh.
And he's also very involved in the Digital Humanities Center.
Oh, great.
Here at
Wow.
Ryerson.
We're doing some work with MIT. The filmmaker I work with this is a visiting artist at MIT now, so through the Highrise project. So there's some great digital humanities work going on down there. Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, I'd like to find out about that. Yeah.
You're coming in quite a crack. As I heard.
Thank you.
We have this undergraduate architecture
Right.
that I think is for architectural science, but in the sort of Ryerson way of doing things, the architecture program here has them working on projects right pretty much from their first year.
Great.
So they're out working with firms and designing things and starting to put it
Fantastic. Yeah.
So I'm sure there might be some architecture people in here that most of years of architecture.
Right.
So these are issues that they pick up front and center when they're studying.
There's just a thought. We are hooked up to the web. Can you show something off the web? It's not crucial. It's not crucial. I'm just making this a clip that I. Sorry about that. It's just it would be later in the presentation if it's possible. It's not. Let me just take a look. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, it would be one specific website, and if I could just review, I might not need to do it. I just don't remember that clip is. Sorry to. If it works, if you don't mind, I'll just give you a URL. Oh, God. That's not even my computer. That's bad. Right. Okay, let me just. Do without. Thanks.
Are we lacking access?
Yeah, because this computer, which isn't mine, has a password. I don't know what the password is. It's not
Is
a
it a
problem. I
Ryerson
was just gonna.
password?
No,
Oh,
it
no,
won't.
it's an NFB thing.
Yeah, it's fine. I think what I need is in the presentation is just.
All right.
But I'll
Okay.
be fine.
All right. Thank you. All right. Welcome, everybody. I think we should get started now. So thank you, everybody, for coming out today for today's event, which is called Highrises, City Life Above the Street. Some of you may know I am Art Blake. I'm a professor in the Department of History here at Ryerson. Today's event is sponsored by the Canadian City Initiative, a new project in the Faculty of Arts begun by the Dean, Dr. Jean-Paul Boudreau, who is here at the back of the room. And it is also sponsored by the Department of History. The interim chair of history, Dr. Catherine Ellis, is at the back. The Canadian City Initiative proposes a new era of engagement between universities and the cities they inhabit and enhance. In the last 60 years, the rate of urbanization worldwide has greatly accelerated. The humanities and social sciences understand that with modern information and communication technologies, cities can literally connect most of the habitable space on this earth. With this capacity has come a growing realization that how we use our power and our interdisciplinary skills to solve our complex urban challenges is now more critical than ever. Our speaker today is Jerry Flahive. Jerry has had a career spanning more than 30 years at Canada's National Film Board. He has produced more than 75 documentary films and interactive projects on a wide range of subjects, including healthcare, cultural diversity, urbanism, history, communications, diplomacy, and racism. Flahive has been at the forefront of the NFB's innovative work in digital media, producing the groundbreaking multi-platform Filmmaker in Residence project at St. Michael's Hospital, winner of the NFB's first Webby Award in 2008. His recent projects include Paris 1919, Water Life, I Was a Child of Holocaust Survivors, Surviving Progress, and The End of Time. Flahive also contributes regularly to major newspapers such as the Globe and Mail, the New York Times, International Herald Tribune, Toronto Star, and he's currently producing Highrise, a multi-year, many-media documentary project looking at vertical life across the globe. Its 360-degree interactive documentary section, Highrise Out My Window, won a 2011 Emmy Award. Highrise is based on the idea and practice of collaboration between filmmakers, academics, community organizations, city and suburban residents around the world, across cultures, languages, and borders. Highrise works on a variety of media content across many platforms, its expansive form opening up opportunities for access, communication, and interaction. Highrise therefore builds on trust and mutual respect, fundamental democratic values appropriate for a public agency such as the NFB, as well as for a public institution like this university. Values which aim through collaboration to produce useful new thinking about our cities and our commonalities with urban dwellers throughout our nation and the world. As Highrise shows, we have much to learn and much to share. It is time to interact. Jerry?
Thank you. Thanks, Art. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I've been told to let you know that every word I say and every slide I show is going to be on the exam. So I have 700 slides. So I actually have to apologize. We have a very large presentation, PowerPoint presentation. I'm actually not a fan of PowerPoint, but because we've been working now for almost 5 years on this project, there's a lot to show and a lot to talk about. But this is it's a very large presentation. I'm going to edit on the fly. So and I'm also trying to. I'd very much like to respond to what you're interested in. I know that there are aspects of what we do that are of interest to documentary filmmakers, to people interested in interactive media, to people interested in urban history, urban planning, architecture. So we have many audiences for the work we do. And so if I've told Art to throw a bun at me if I start steering off too far into HTML5 or something that's really boring to most of you. So, and I'd hope to allow for some good time at the end for questions. So please, I'm happy to serve that in any way you'd like. And now I'm going to try to use this. Voila, Highrise Manifesto. Process, stories, and impact. Maybe what I'll start with is a very little bit of context about how we make what we make at the National Film Board, why we make what we make at the National Film Board. The National Film Board of Canada is 75 years old this coming May. We're Canada's public producer and distributor. We've been around since 1939. Really, in a way, not entirely, but to some extent, a creature of those times of World War II. The Film Board, in its first years, was also a kind of film propaganda agency for the war effort, founded by John Ryerson, who was also the Wartime Information Commissioner. So as you can imagine, the war started about 6 months after the Film Board was created, so much of that work was really telling the Canadian war story. But we've continued with our work, and essentially, there's two definitions that still work for us today, that still apply. And one is the Film Board's mandate is simply to interpret Canada to Canadians and people in other nations. That's kind of it. It gives us very broad room to work within. We've made something like 14,000 films in that time. Some of them haven't been films, some have been interactive work and other kinds of media, but primarily films, primarily documentaries and animation, short animation. But the other definition that's really potent and powerful for us as we're making work in new realms like the web is John Ryerson, who founded the Film Board, was actually the person who coined the term documentary as it applies to media. And his definition is, variously you see it in different forms, but essentially it's the creative interpretation of reality. So it's not journalism, it's not current affairs, it's not simply a record, an unvarnished record. It's not simply pointing a camera at something and documenting, despite the word. It's maybe a bit of an unfortunate word, because I think documentary films have, came to be seen as, kind of educational vehicles. They're sort of containers for visual information. Somebody once put it, they're kind of like the castor oil of media. They're good for you, but they don't taste very good. And I think that's an incredibly unfair designation. I think documentary is one of the most vibrant art forms. It's actually an art form that's exploding and expanding and evolving very, very quickly and in interesting ways, in a way that I think it's going to catch up with and in fact surpass some of the creative work happening in fiction, but that's just me. So for the National Film Board, we're in the business of making films, telling Canadian stories or telling international stories from a Canadian perspective. And for a very, very long time, the way to do that was to make a film that had a beginning, middle, and end. But the Film Board has also always embraced new technology, used new technology. In fact, some technologies like IMAX were developed at the NFB. Lightweight sound recording equipment in the early years in the 50s and 60s to allow filmmakers to kind of go out into the field and actually document things in a more intimate way. A lot of those innovations were driven by or sort of the Film Board participated in. And so us making work that is on the web is just second nature to us. It's just exploring new platforms, both to deliver content, but very importantly to make content. So, in some cases, some people find it a bit odd that the Film Board is doing work that isn't, our name is the National Film Board, but I feel we kind of broke out of that box of definition quite some time ago. Where did we start? Well, many, many years ago, 2004, 2005, I started working with a filmmaker named Katerina Szyszek, who's one of the pioneers of interactive work. She's known internationally. She's actually still working with me on the Highrises project, but she's also a visiting artist at MIT. She teaches all over the world. Great Toronto-based filmmaker. And we started working on a project at St. Michael's Hospital just down the street. And at that time, 2004 was actually when Kat came and we started developing it. There was essentially no Facebook, no YouTube, no Twitter. So the idea of making documentary was still really stuck in, we're going to make a bunch of films. We make films, that's what we do. And so this project, which we called Filmmaker in Residence, the idea was to put Kat inside a hospital for maybe 3 years, working with the community of people inside that hospital, and not to make films about high-tech medicine or people having heart surgery, but really about the work that St. Mike's does out in the field and sort of community medicine. And so the first approach was, there's lots of great stories there. We should make a film. That's what we do. We make a single film about a subject, and we reduce all of it to the strongest stories, which means discarding huge amounts of material. And most documentary films, are kind of driven by television or were driven by television. And so, you know, every idea is a 43-minute idea, because that's how long a television hour is approximately once you take off the commercials. And so if you think about any of the media you work in or consume, you know, if there was a very narrow frame that every book, every novel had to be 261 pages, not 304, not 108, but 261 pages, no matter what the content was, that's a very constricting kind of framework. And so with Filmmaker Residence, we already started pushing back and saying, well, you know, maybe we shouldn't make a single film, maybe we should make multiple films. And maybe we should do it more in collaboration with the people at the hospital, the doctors and nurses, and the people they serve. And so that's what we set out to do. And having Kat as a filmmaker in residence meant a lot of time just spending watching, thinking, meeting, exploring different ideas that could form documentary work. And so I don't expect you to read all of this, but Kat sort of established this filmmaker in residence manifesto, which is very much about a participatory approach, about an open-ended approach. We don't know exactly what all of the films are going to do. And you think about the documentary filmmaking model, the documentary storytelling model, again, very driven by television, and the Film Board has pushed against that often, but we operate in a world in which people watch documentaries on television. That's been the primary way, it certainly was the primary way people saw documentaries, is that you kind of establish your thesis. I'm going to make a film about the emergency department at St. Michael's Hospital, say. And so I kind of decided, and it's going to be 43 minutes, it's going to be about an hour, and I need to find some characters. And I need a story arc that delivers over that course of time. And, you know, I can only shoot it in a certain amount of time, so more longitudinal stories, they don't really work. You know, I need to find something that's faster. All of those things are just second nature in a way and I'm probably sounding more harsh than I mean to be, but it's kind of the rules of the creative game with documentaries. So we tried to push away from that with this. And we had the luxury of time. We knew we were going to be there for several years. And so we didn't have to grab stories and turn them around quite quickly. And so this is a kind of a very different approach to thinking about documentary in a much more collaborative way. So when we did that project for several years, what we ended up doing, in fact, was making a number of short films over the course of not making them all and releasing them at once, but releasing them slowly as we were completing them. But also around 2005, seems a bit like ancient history, but 2005, we started talking about using the web. And again, you know, just with the emergence of YouTube, even the idea of saying we're going to make a film and show it on the web was still a fairly radical notion. We were pushing that even further, saying, yes, these films will be on the web, but we actually want to create a documentary that is made out of the web. It's made of the web, and it uses video, photography, audio, text. It's made for the web, not as a delivery mechanism, but that's actually our playground. And so we created, I don't think it's here, unfortunately, in this presentation, but we created a website called Filmmaker in Residence. nfb.ca/Filmmaker in Residence is still up there after 7 years, 8 years, so it looks a little dusty to me anyway, but it was, we think, maybe have been the world's first feature-length interactive documentary. And there is no proper sequence to go through it. It's non-linear. Much of it, as I said, is based on photography and audio, not so much video. We kind of treat video as just, it's another medium. It isn't the dominant one. And so that really blew a lot of people's minds, the idea that you could use the web in a creative way. And I know that probably sounds strange in saying this in 2014, but it certainly was at the time. And even at the Film Board, which has always been very supportive of innovation, it was a conceptual leap. You know, a lot of people said, the web as a document, no, the web is a place where you promote documentaries. That's what it, and we said, no, this is the thing. This is the documentary right here on the web. And so that work really opened up a lot of people's eyes, and it opened up the possibilities to do things in a different way. And so we then proposed something that built on that, and that's Highrise. And so every one of these dots is going to be on your exam, so you've got to figure this all out. So we're going from 2009 to, actually will be wrapped up in 2015. So the Highrise project will be about 6 years. And what we said essentially was, how did this process evolve? We started after Filmmaker in Residence saying, we want to do something else. What are some issues? What are some ideas that could lead us to do a kind of another sort of Filmmaker in Residence project, but not airlifting Kat into another institution? And so we had a lot of discussion about issues that were, issues that were kind of bubbling up, but not, again, in a very topic-driven current affairs way. Let's make a film about poverty in Toronto. Let's make a film about, agriculture out west, like this sort of journalistic sense. As we were talking, we said there's something in the air about cities. Around 2006 to maybe 2007, I think, more than 50% of the world's population is urban as of around that time. And obviously, I think it's going to be 60, 70% within 20 years. So there's something in the air. That's an area of study, an area to tell stories, but what could it be? And again, as storytellers, as media makers, remember that 43-minute box. You immediately start thinking, well, what is the shape going to be? What maybe is this? If we were in the television business, we'd say that's a big topic, the future of cities. It's probably a 4-hour television series, and right away you start filling in those containers, those boxes. And so we were resisting that. And what we found, what was liberating with Filmmaker Residence, is to say, we don't know what we're going to make. We're going to make some stuff, and it's all going to be documentary, but we're not sure what it's going to be. And so I'm a staff producer at the Film Board, Kat is a freelance director, but we still have to kind of pitch internally and get permission to do these things. So essentially what we did is a huge amount of research, and we worked very closely with some great academics here in Toronto, at University of Toronto and York University, really looking at where is the city going. And we found a few things really emerged, and this is also, I think, a different model. Rather than coming up with your thesis and then finding research or academics to kind of prove your thesis, it's just saying, let's learn, let's listen, let's see what's actually happening out there. And what we discovered was Toronto is one of the most vertical cities on the planet. We didn't notice that, and most people don't notice that. And it's a function of the way this city was evolved, the way it was designed. It's quite different. Toronto is a little bit freakish. It's not like other North American cities. Toronto has more high-rise apartment buildings than any city in North America except Manhattan. It's an unbelievably vertical city, but when we look around, we don't see it. Well, many of those buildings are in the suburbs, and they were built in the 50s and 60s. This has nothing to do with the big condo boom happening downtown. That's just adding some, and I think Toronto has more high-rise apartments under construction right now than any city in the world, pretty much. Except for maybe pop-up cities in China. And so the more we talked about it, we thought there's something about the high-rise and there's something about the suburbs. That's where the action is. Major developed cities like Toronto, it's not that nothing's happening in the downtown, but when people come to Toronto, when immigration happens, where growth happens and has been happening, it's at the fringes, it's at the edges. And that's where a lot of academic work was revealing interesting things. So we thought there's something interesting about the periphery as a place of action, a place for stories. I also find what I love about documentary is it doesn't need a hook. You hear about journalism, journalists need a hook for a story. And for me, documentary makes its own hook. The best documentaries tell you a story that's right in front of your eyes and you haven't seen it. And so we thought there's something there in the suburbs. We wanted to do a local kind of project, very, very much tied to our reality in Toronto, but also do something global. And we now had this first taste of doing something on the web. So we could use web technology, 2009-ish, and that continued to grow and advance. But I think the real conceptual leap was the idea of framing this with the high-rise apartment building. And I think that's a super important point. It's sort of parsing a subject down to something that is both, it's kind of like just the right size, just the right temperature. There are millions and millions of high-rise buildings. Billions of people live in them. So it's the most ubiquitous built form probably of the 20th century, and maybe in the 21st, I guess. But also it's a familiar thing. We all kind of have lived in one, know someone who's lived in one. You can kind of get your head around an 11-story building or a 30-story building. And so we've decided to use the high-rise as kind of our storytelling prism. This is not a project about architecture. It's not, although parts of our project have dealt with that. It's not a project about urban planning, although that inevitably comes along with it. It's really about human life. How do people live vertically? And the other thing I've always found exciting and sort of attractive about documentary is I love when we find stories that are untold, where the mainstream media doesn't go. So again, if you were to say, let's do a project about the future of cities, well, We should go to Dubai. We should go to Los Angeles. We should go to Paris. You know, go to the big cities. Well, that's where the media goes. That's the kind of default stock photo image of, you know, future of cities. The reality is it's happening in 50-year-old buildings up at Kipling and you know, Steeles. It's not sexy, but it's dead interesting. It's really, really interesting what's going on in the suburbs and high-rise buildings all over the world. And so the high-rise building became our sort of storytelling device. And what, God bless the film board, what we essentially said is we need about 4 years and about $1 million, and we have no idea what we're going to make. So please say yes to that. And they did. Because with Filmmaker Residence at St. Mike's, we'd sort of shown that we, you know, projects evolved along the way, and we made a lot of stuff. We made a lot of media. So, but we also said in 2009, this project's going to be platform agnostic. We're not, this isn't just on the web, although obviously most of what we've done is, all of what we've done ends up on the web pretty much, but it's not about just building a website. We're kind of beyond that. So this is, I don't know if I can make sense of it, but this is the sort of high-rise story universe, and it's still evolving, you know, both in time and the sort of scope, the geographic scope, and I'll show you some of these projects. But the other thing, finally, I think, is that to say in 2000, we were really developing this in 2008, so to say in 2008 that we knew exactly what technologies people would be using and consuming in 2014-15 is just insane. If we could have said we're going to make a series of 1-hour documentaries, there probably still will be television around in 2014, so that would probably work. But you know, we've always had this sense at the film board of pushing the boundaries of storytelling. So let's just see. Let's see what is out there. Let's see what tools are available, and everything is documentary. All, you know, we're now in discussions with a major publisher to do a book. There may be a print book. That's a perfectly legitimate thing. We've made films. Films are still okay to make. We're not discarding linear filmmaking. We've done installations. We've done, Kat has done live performances of some of our web-based work with musicians improvising along the way. So that's kind of the world that we're operating in. That's not so interesting. So this is, I'll kind of walk you through some of these elements of you know, Kat also wrote a kind of manifesto for our approach to high-rise. Always connect the local with the global and vice versa. And we really think the high-rise is this kind of antenna for the future. It's the antenna for how cities are changing. And it's just one way. This was a kind of our little philosophical statement: the towers in the world in the towers. You know, you go past these apartment buildings that just look utterly anonymous. You know, if you came to Toronto in the 1970s, you know, Little Italy was where people from Italy arrived, and, you know, Chinatown, there was one Chinatown, and that's, you knew what you were seeing, you knew where you were, you knew where people had come from. If you see a high-rise apartment building up on Kipling, it's just a blank slate. But when we started working with some of the residents in this particular building in 2009, many of the people were really from, you know, the Philippines and from the Caribbean. Over the course of 3 years, a lot of people are now Iraqi Christians. There's a constant shift. And in fact, when we did a survey of residents in the building, something like, it was off the charts, like 98% of them were new to Canada. So imagine, you know, for someone my age, the sense of somebody moves to Canada, they arrive in downtown Toronto. They arrive and kind of, you know, they're sort of maybe naturally move to a sort of ethnic enclave, an ethnic neighborhood, and they find support there. They find a community there. They're in the middle of the city. This is their experience of Canada, is beautiful, multicultural, diverse Toronto. If you move to an apartment building at Kipling and Steeles, that's Canada. That's your experience of Canada. Downtown Toronto, and I'll show you some evidence of this, downtown Toronto might as well be on the moon. You know, it's not a relevant place to them. It's not their experience of the country. This is a sample from one of the first projects we did called Out My Window, but it gives you a sense. These are all apartments in different cities all over the world. And this is our trailer for Out My Window. Thanks. Can you crank it up? Thanks. That's a Tibetan family in a high-rise in Parkdale. So essentially what the project is 13 apartments in 13 cities all over the world, including one in Toronto. And you can take a 360-degree view of people's lives inside and out. This is a housing project in Chicago that's being torn down as people are living in it. We were the first documentary to use this 360 camera technology. As you're watching on the web, you can move the camera around. It's pretty common now, but it wasn't 3 years ago. So again, we started breaking some of the rules about documentary. You know, when you are developing an interactive project, there's very little, there still are very few examples. There aren't thousands and thousands of these projects. So what's the language that you use? What we've done actually is there are actually 49 short films hidden inside this project. When you click on Yak, there's a 2-minute film that pops up. But we didn't present a playlist. Would you like to watch 49 films? There's about 90 minutes of content, so it is feature length. But there's no set way to experience this. You can pick by, if you like people's faces, you can click on a face. If you go to the map, you can pick a city. If you just like the picture in the apartment. And so there is no order to do it. There's no linear way that you have to follow through in these things. And it speaks to the nature of people's behavior on the web. And when we're making work for the web, we understood very quickly that, you know, people spend 5 or 6 minutes on a website on average. And so you can't build an experience that is an hour, 43 minutes or 90 minutes and just assume that people are going to sit there and watch it. Just think of your own behavior on the web. So the work becomes very modular, and this very much suited this project. But the other thing I want to say too about how this pushes documentary is, you think of a documentary as there's a lot of exposition. You know, if we're making a film about life in a high-rise in Istanbul, you kind of have to set people up, like where is Istanbul and what is it like, and let's see some of the surroundings. What we did here, we didn't do any of that here. We approached this more in a much more intimate way. You know, if I was invited to your apartment and you said come in for coffee and I came in the front door, I wouldn't stop at the door and say, wait a minute, I can't have coffee with you until I know your whole life story. Now I want you to explain your whole family background, then I will come in. Well, that's what happens in traditional documentaries. Here you're just in somebody's apartment, you're in somebody's space. And we allow you to kind of look around and experience that. And we had a great response. We had audiences, you know, hundreds of thousands of viewers of this from all over the world. And no one said, I'm confused. I need a lot of background on each of these cities to understand it. It's just a human story. We're not trying to tell the official story of Istanbul or Sao Paulo. And that's the other thing we've approached with Highrise, is to do those stories, as I said, that maybe haven't been told. And so we discovered there are about 50 or 60 cities in the world that are about the same size as Toronto. They're like 5 or 6 million. And we just thought, you know, you never see Sao Paulo or Phnom Penh or Istanbul on the primetime news unless something horrible happens. You do see Paris and LA and New York and Los Angeles and places like that. So we just thought it's more interesting to go to places that are maybe more like our experience in Toronto, the scale, and that haven't really been told. So that informed our selection. These are some folks up at that building up on Kipling, and this was really our first project before called 1000th Tower, and this was to work very directly with the community there. And what we did is, it's an unbelievably diverse place. We in fact, we set out to do, as we did in Filmmaker Residence, not to just, you know, there's a real etiquette and culture to making documentary films. If I show up at your house with a camera and say I'm here to make a documentary about you, you're going to slam the door in my face. You know, you're not like, who the hell are you to come into my place? So we spend months and months and months just really without any specific plan in mind to say we're making a thing and we're now in development with that production. What we did is we did community media workshops. We just taught people how to to take photography and post it on the web and tell their own stories and see that these are some of the folks we work with. we look at everything from that sort of global, local perspective. So those were some of the cities we were first looking at, so I'm sort of flying through. And then, our most recent project is with the New York Times. We finally, 4 years in, we finally got to New York, and I'll tell that story a little later. Part of this manifesto is to build new kinds of partnerships and start there rather than immediately conforming to product or form. So I've talked a little bit about that. And a real range of partners that, again, you won't see broadcasters here, that sort of traditional realm, or theatrical distributors. A lot of it is, people in the community, various organizations, being open to new technologies and working with academics and some unlikely partners as well. The New York Times approached us about 1.5 years ago. I don't know what conversation we could have had with the New York Times 5 or 6 years ago. They're in the newspaper business, we're in the documentary film business. Either they're writing a story about us or we're making a film about them. There would be no conversation. Now the idea of collaborating on something together on the web made a lot of sense. Working with academics, and maybe I can answer some questions about that. These are some of the folks that we've really had deep partnerships with, including MIT. Again, one of the things that there is a kind of documentary approach that we're professional media makers, we know what we're doing, we have our methodology, and you're the subjects. Kat has this great line, as she said, the people formerly known as subjects. And there is a history, it's not always an exploitative one, but there is a kind of history that, we're here to tell your story, we're going to vacuum up images and audio from your life, and then, we'll go and edit a film, and we'll probably show it to you when it's finished or when it's almost finished. But this is very different. We've learned a lot from our work at St. Mike's, a lot from working with academics on this project about very different approaches to when you're interviewing people for academic research. There's a whole other set of ethical approaches and principles. And so we've adopted some of those, and we've created some new ones as we needed them. This is a little bit about one of our newest projects. That's Kat Cizik. So we learned so much from that process, and again, it goes against the grain for a documentary approach. We essentially put thousands of dollars into this very extensive, academically rigorous survey of residents, and very specifically about how their use of digital tools, cameras, cell phones, the web, social media, shaped their sense of being citizens, of being part of a city. And what we discovered was their disconnection from the city around them as new residents. But we did that work without knowing what the thing is we were going to make. That research was essentially raw data, and we let it sort of define where this project was going to go. Again, it's a sense of co-creation. It doesn't mean that everybody gets to direct a film or that everyone has equal skill set, but it's much more collaborative than the usual approach. And so 1000th Tower was the first project we did, and super simple. It was just photo blogging. These are some of the residents. Their text, their own words with their own photographs, and put up on the web. It's on the Highrise website. We also did for the project called 1,000,000th Tower, which was about using new technology to sort of explore how people could imagine their community to be different. What might a building look like if there was a community garden? We had these charrettes. We brought in, that's Graham Stewart, a Toronto architect. We brought in architects and animators, people who make animated films with the film board, to kind of take the residents' ideas and bring them to life. A little bit, yeah, okay. Maybe I'll skip through that. And yeah, on something like Out My Window, we had 100 collaborators around the world. Kat didn't go to those 13 cities. In fact, we had photographers and audio storytellers in about 25 cities, but we ended up picking the best stories that were about 13. Kat directed most of it by Skype. She went to about 3 of the 13 cities. So we very, very much, this wasn't commissioning photographs. This was essentially Kat writing a very extensive creative and technical brief, us finding collaborators all over the world and saying, let's work together through new media forms. That's not so interesting. Out My Window Participate, we also, once we created the 13 apartments and we put that piece up for a few months, we invited people to post their own photos on Flickr. Take a photo from life outside your building. In this case, it was during the uprising in Egypt. These are photos out of somebody's high-rise apartment building. So again, the high-rise is this window on the world. And so we created a collaborative website. We have about 800 photos from people all over the world, a view out of their high-rise building. Okay, maybe the New York Times Project. Again, we created some work ourselves, but we also, through the New York Times, they put out the call to New York Times readers all over the world to send in their photographs of their life in a high-rise. The New York Times tweets about you. It reaches 9 million people, so we got thousands of photographs. Maybe I will just kind of go past some of this a little bit. Interesting though it may be. This is 1,000,000th Tower. Just again, work at the Kipling Tower in Toronto that I was just talking about. So again, it looks very, very different than some of the other work. This is about 2 years old now.
I think this space has huge potential.
We really need some place to build a community.
That's not a video. You're actually seeing the computer turning the camera in this 3D world.
We're just trying to make a photo come alive, to say like, this space is alive.
As we say that the whole world is connected now, our world around in the neighborhood will be connected.
As I said, this presentation kind of goes pretty deep. This was an installation we did in Amsterdam a couple of years ago, where we took Out My Window and converted it, portions of it, into a live installation in a gallery. Just sort of exploring different ways to present documentary for people to experience it.
The stories I felt really compelled by. I found it very moving and emotionally moving, but I also like the way the screens moved, like a moving landscape.
This was 2010, I think. And as I mentioned, the live performance where Kat sort of VJ'd out my window, not like I'm doing now. Here's my project, click, but kind of being a VJ with the images and cutting out the audio, the music tracks that we had there, and working with live musicians to kind of improvise through, so more visual experience. This is if you go to 1 Millionth Tower. Whenever you're looking at it, it shows the current weather and time. So if it's night and raining, that's what you'll see in the background. If it's night and raining at Kipling, if you want to know. We were also approached, again, the high-rise approach is very much we're open, we're collaborative, people approach us to do things, we have years to do this work. If you create really interesting conceptual frame, people like to be part of it. So we were approached by Sharon Switzer, Art for Commuters, to say, we'd like to do an installation, a photographic and video installation in the Toronto subway system. So we did this about 2 years ago. So these are not marketing posters for High-Rise. They're sort of elements from the Kipling stories. And there were also short silent videos running on the screen. So this was up for 8 weeks. A couple of million people would have seen this, and it cost us nothing. These are some of the residents from Kipling seeing themselves in the subway for the first time. At Kipling Station.
That's right. I think. Oh, that's the garden. I knew it. Once I seen that flowers coming out, oh my God, that's beautiful.
That was Faith's design for the garden that the animators brought to life. Again, very much part of it for us is there's an audience that's interested in documentary. People go to Hot Docs, or they like to watch documentaries, on PBS or CBC. Not so much CBC anymore. That's a core audience for us, for people making documentaries. But a lot of people don't do that, and so we love investing in and considering ways to bring documentaries to people in new. So watching a 2-minute silent documentary in the subway, I'm good with that. If it's posters. I'll skip over that. The New York Times, we'll get to that. This is a project we're working on now called Digital Citizenship, which is, again, grew out of that research at Kipling about how digital tools shape people's sense of, who live in high-rises, how it shapes their sense of being a citizen in a very broad way. So we're capturing stories all over the world. These are young game developers who basically live in a server farm in Korea. They live in the building and work in the building, and that's their life. And that's where they live. And then they go downstairs. Digital divide is something that emerged really interesting from the research and just meeting people all over the world, and particularly at Kipling. You'd think many of the people in that building are UN refugees. They've just recently arrived in Canada with nothing. And so, there's a common understanding. Digital divide means, some of us have access to the internet and others don't, and it's drawn along economic lines. What we discovered was the internet has become, as one of the residents said, it's like food and water. So you might think, I forget what the national average is for internet access, but for the people at Kipling, it's like 80–90% have access. That's really surprising. You think, well, if you don't have that much money, you're new to the country, paying your Rogers cable bill every month is not going to be top of the list. For these folks, their lifeline, their emotional lifeline is back home in the Philippines or in Iraq or somewhere else. They have to have the internet, and that really changed our understanding about how they see the city that they live in. Work at the margins, the peripheries, connect back to the center. And so this is some of what I said. Global suburbs have more common with each other than they often do with the centers of the cities they surround. This is, as you can see, that's a long way to come, believe me, on the TDC at 5 in the morning. You cannot get from Kipling to downtown. This was our former mayor, who is a huge supporter of this project, but also because he's invested very heavily in something called tower renewal, which is still around. The notion of these high-rise buildings, many of which are kind of crumbling, built in the 50s and 60s, are an incredible renewable resource that you can't just say, we're going to tear them down and build new glass towers. They're worth preserving. People have to live in them. And so he had a very comprehensive plan to for private and public investment to sort of renew these buildings and insulation and their infrastructure, but also to make the areas around them much more lively. I mean, some of you architecture nerds here will know about the tower in the park model, Le Corbusier and others, who sort of this beautiful plans of like a high-rise tower surrounded by grass. That might be great if you live in Malibu, but if you're living at Kiel in the middle of the winter, this arid space around it, it has a huge impact on what a sense of community can be. If there's no stores, there's no street life, and so that was part of what Tower Renewal set out to do. It's still trying, I think. And so we brought the residents whose photos you saw and stories you saw from the Kipling Tower, we brought them to City Hall. We organized a live event with 300 people, planners, politicians, business people. These folks had never been to City Hall. Many of them had never been to Queen and Bay. And so they presented their work. They were also on CBC Radio. And then Matt Galloway from CBC Radio went up to the tower. We did a live 3-hour broadcast from there. So again, this sort of connecting the center and the peripheries. These are some of the results that came out of our academic survey at Kipling. So again, 97% not born in Canada. 50% of the households are more than 5 people in these little apartments. So again, you look at a high-rise, like nothing going on in there. It's full of stories. Incredibly young population. This is part of the project we're working on now, just about this place. This is a family living in the Tower of
India.
Kipling.
I was here, and then I opened up a little bit, and then a little bit, and then a little bit.
Actually, it's part of our routine life right now. We use internet for our prayer, darshans. We call it darshans, like looking of God. So different temples, they have statues, different statues, and they put it online every day from different temple all across the world. Every day morning prayer, we have our separate puja for everybody. We have physical puja. Puja, we don't do it on computer. We have all our personal puja, which we put it down on the floor, we sit down, we meditate, and then we do darshan on website. Like look at the God, different from different temple statues of the God. This picture was taken at, this is from LA Temple, Los Angeles, California. So now we can feel like we are there and we are looking at the God in LA. We can feel like LA, Los Angeles comes in our home. And when we do darshan like Chicago's, LA's or Atlanta or different mandirs even from India, we feel like that all those murtis are ours, those people are ours, so we feel like a whole big family. Actually, she watches more like our Toronto website.
Next Toronto website.
Which you
It's
just
a temple.
opened right now. This is our Toronto temple, 427 and Finch. That's the temple we go every Saturday, Sunday. She feels so homely when she goes this temple because she helped construction of the temple from beginning of from foundation. So everybody did volunteer work. So that's why she has more attachment with the Toronto temple. And every day after puja, kids touches feet of parents, just as to show them a respect and to get their blessings. So that's our morning routine. When at the night time, when sleeping time, we don't carry laptop in the bedroom, but from our cell phone. When this 3G and special kinds of phone comes in, that's when we connect to the internet, we download pictures. It's very handy. While we are sleeping, it's very handy. So it's very handy to look it on the phone. Whatever thoughts we sleep with, that's all goes in our mind throughout the night. So that's why at the night time especially, and when we begin the day, we remember God, so our mind stays with Him and doesn't go in any bad ways. With the use of internet, that's like the internet brought a whole world in our home.
Sorry, I'm going to skip over that. But again, the sense of we need to understand what a high-rise means. You think about that story of people who've newly arrived in Canada. The high-rise is already a very isolating place. There's very little proper transit. But the internet provides a vehicle for them to communicate, and express their faith. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's obviously an incredible lifeline and sort of emotional support for people in those situations, but does it keep them isolated? Does it keep them from engaging with the city? We're not passing judgment, we're just telling stories, but we think it's an interesting way of looking at it. We're doing some work in Mumbai as well. This, maybe I'll skip over it. Maybe, again, some people might be more interested or not about some of our use of technology in this project. This is really exciting. This is our organizational chart. I know you love this. This is going to be on the exam. So there, quick, get that, okay. Yeah, that's a little documentary nerdy sort of stuff there. This was, again, the creative and technical brief for Out My Window. It's how do you collaborate with people all over the world by not flying around the world and making documentaries in a usual way. That's boring, that's boring, that's boring, that's boring, that's boring. Okay, that's interesting, but that's more sort of a film school thing, so we can maybe talk about that later if you want. Yeah, this is, again, I was saying earlier with Art and some of the other colleagues about, you make documentaries, what impact can they have? You're tied to traditional distribution systems. When you put it on the web, I've discovered shocking news. People all over the world are really interested in Canadian stories. It's shocking to hear. They just never had ready access to them in a way, because there are so many gatekeepers, distributors. Film Board is a distributor, but we can't go to Sweden or Botswana and force our films down people's throats. There's broadcasters and distributors and home video and all of those festivals, all of those methods we use. When it's on the web, there are no gatekeepers, and we don't have a massive marketing budget, so the work finds its way out there. So we had, for 1 millionth tower, which is about people in a high-rise on Kipling, we had people from 180 countries, huge response. And in fact, it was launched at Wired.com. Wired was so interested in the work we were doing, they actually put it on their website for 48 hours before it was on our site. The subway, the reach of the subway campaign, we've had a lot of press and awards and things. That's kind of cool. What was that? Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I'll show you this. This is a little bit about our process working with people at Kipling.
Do many people walk along here?
No, it's all fence.
But we don't have any access to the park, and we see some holes in the fences.
Sometimes it's too ugly to look around, and you will not be happy to invite a friend or family to come.
The question is, what can we do with the space, right?
Yeah.
Any ideas?
Why don't we start drawing, now that we've got that context, where we think those paths might go.
So you were saying that you want us to envision the whole big picture.
Whatever you think should be happening.
Right.
Just creating spaces that are intimate and flexible. The marketplace could connect both buildings.
The problem is, this is not very good accessible.
There should be a daycare. There should be a daycare.
We're just trying to make a photo come alive, to say the space is alive, but it still feels really empty, and to slowly build the characters to come on top of it, to make it breathing and moving. None of these images are final, they're just placeholders, just to give you a feeling of where it's going. So we're hoping to transform the space from daytime to nighttime in the animation. And then moving on to the garden, we want this piece section to feel really meditative.
It's beautiful. Look at it. Oh my gosh. I'm like in another world right now. Just by looking at it.
We don't have Jamal breakdancing yet, but we're hoping to use him.
We practice hip-hop, R&B, soca, and reggae.
I had been following Mozilla's Popcorn Project, and I realized that our short film, 1 Millionth Tower, could benefit from integrating more into the web. And so I asked the web developer to begin exploring HTML5. He proposed that our film turn into a virtual space online that the user actually travels through instead of creating a linear film.
And I thought, well, this looks so 3D, then why not actually make the experience 3D?
So the animators moved right into Helio Studio and started working together to create that space. It's a tribute to the power of imagination. It comes from nothing and it turns into something, and I think we've all been a part of that.
People will see this, they'll see how self-evident it is, and we've already got the ball rolling.
We forget how valuable it is to actually create a neighborhood.
I personally feel like we are pioneers.
Like they say, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. So hopefully one day we'll get somewhere and say, oh, we did it, you know?
At the side of the building, they're building a humongous playground. Today we have a brand new beginning. We have a playground. The old one is history, and the new one is a brand new beginning.
This offer came up for foresters to come and build a playground with Kaboom here. And because they had done 2 years of planning and organizing, they were able to actually put the application in within about a week and a half. The donation came from this guy, but you've got to be ready with your arms open.
It's a matter of saying, does a community have a vision? Does it know where it wants to go? And I think that that's the hard work. That's the work that took all of us literally years to do. And now I think, especially this neighborhood, it's kind of ready to pop.
It started with the 1 millionth tower.
We feel that we were the pioneers starting up the whole vision. There should be about 80 to 90 residents working with 170 people from fosters. And I'm running around to feed them because I'm the lunch administrator.
Vertical living is like, it just keeps you inside of your house and you feel like you have nothing really to socialize with. Today's a big amalgamation of, people coming together and talking and fellowship, eating, making a playground and really talking about and even focusing on what are some of the bigger things that could happen within this area.
It's just incredible. This is turning into a live neighborhood now.
A playground in the grand scheme of things is very humble, but it's real.
In the 1 millionth tower, my mother, Faith, is actually blowing seeds around. It's very symbolic. This is one seed, and it's growing. So now many more seeds are gonna grow.
That was a nice happy ending, the real world. I'm going to try and get to, see if I can get to New York Times project. Oh, that's me on the right. This was, again, an open-ended project where we're seeking collaboration. We were approached by MIT, the Open Documentary Lab, and many of the collaborators there to come down and talk about our approach to interactive documentary. The Film Board is really one of the world leaders in this realm, and Kat is now a visiting artist, going back and forth, still mostly here, working at MIT. That is not interesting. Oh, this is our New York Times project. This is launched in the New York Times in October. Already there. You know, maybe I will just stop there, and I'll just talk a little bit about the New York Times project, and then I'll happy to answer any questions you have. We were approached by the Times they started a couple of years ago, about a year and a half ago or so, a program called OpDocs on the New York Times, NewYorkTimes.com, commissioning basically short 4-minute documentaries, about one a week. And so the commissioning editor saw me at an event and said, you know, would you guys do a high-rise thing maybe for us? And that evolved into us doing 3 short films and a collaborative 4th film that you saw earlier where photos came from around the world, but also knitting together those films, which you can watch on the New York Times website or on the Highrise website, with an interactive component. So not like the films are over here and the interactive is over here. At any point we're watching the films, you can dive down, turn the photos over, explore more. It's kind of like visual footnoting. But really the conversation started with them saying you can have total access to our archives in the basement of the New York Times, which they call the morgue. 6 million undigitized photos about everything on the planet. So Kat went down, swam in there for a week, and we used about 250 of their photos and some from other sources to really tell the story of the history of the high rise. But again, not in a kind of didactic way. They really are. It's seeing the high rise as a political tool, as a social tool, as a cultural a form of cultural expression, going back much, much further than the 20th century. So that's 3. We got some amazing collaborators. Feist narrates the first film, and Cold Specs, who's a fantastic hip-hop artist, narrated one of the films as well. So, so that launched on the front page of the New York Times. So we got huge international audience, and it's quite different than what we've done in the other projects. We have no, Highrise is a creative container. We have no obligation to do, you know, like a television series or an anthology where every piece kind of has to be the same. So, and the next piece we're wrapping up next year with digital citizenship will be for the iPad. It'll be a sort of tablet-based piece. So that's a lot. It's all in your exam. So there's going to be a spot quiz. When I say digital, what do I mean by digital? So I'm happy to shut up and take any questions you might have, if you have any questions. No? Yeah?
When the researchers / residents were going door to door, what sorts of questions were they asking?
It was very focused on their use of digital technology and kind of how they connect with people. So for example, one of the questions and the answer, a real eye-opener, is the top 5 people who you communicate with, texting, Facebook, Skype, whatever, where do they live? And not a single person in the entire building we surveyed was anyone in Toronto in the top 5. They were all somewhere else in the world, or certainly not in the neighborhood and not in downtown Toronto. And that told us a lot, a sense of disconnection. But it was mostly about that and how many devices do you have? Where are they in your house? And all these amazing stories came out. We found a young woman who had arrived recently from Syria, and her apartment had nothing in it except a table and a laptop computer, like nothing. There was just like a futon, I think, and that was. But she was, she was here as a refugee. She had to leave, and so, it was maybe not 24 hours a day, but she essentially was on Skype back home. So, what does that apartment mean? What does that building mean? What does that community, what does the city mean for somebody in that situation where they're kind of in a container, and there's really little, there are social services, but how can somebody like that be fully part of a city's life? And, those folks in that building, are they suburbanites? This whole discussion of like downtown versus, are they the suburbanites? Are those the, Rob Ford voters who drive SUVs? I don't think so. They're not part of the political process. and they feel very disengaged, but they have a pipeline back to home. So it was mostly about that, where are you from, who do you connect with? That's more of our focus on this particular project. Anybody else? Yeah, way back there.
Sort of on the same topic, Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, said that Canadians' access, in particular the internet, was significantly worse than that of many of the other countries in the world, and that it was in fact a human rights issue.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I mean, I think if you don't have, I mean, it's now, it's no longer about internet access in your where you live. It's about, do you have mobile access? Can you really be functional in this economy and engaging with government, engaging with social services if you don't have internet access? I mean, it's going to be very, very difficult. I think Canada's weird. I mean, Canadians, I think, are per capita consume more online video than almost anyone in the world. But there's still a huge digital divide. But that's what I mean. The eye-opener from us was that when people feel they need the internet, they will give up other things to get the internet. And it's absolutely, I think it is a human right. And I think that actually, I think the FCC, the Federal Communications Commissions in the U.S. has essentially kind of declared it practically as that. I don't think it's not enforceable in that sense, but they see that planning for U.S. communications policy for the next 10 years should mean everyone should have access to mobile technology, and that's, it's obviously happening around the world, and our rates are pretty high here, generally speaking. I think I just saw something that Canada has the second highest penetration of smartphones, so the more advanced phones in the world, but that's, again, it's like William Gibson said, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. So, sorry.
Of the 80 to 90% of individuals who are connected, by that, do you mean that they have devices in their apartments or they use public libraries? Because I wondered about the old kind of centers of community.
Yeah, more at home, because we also found, of course, that maybe some of us can take for granted that we have internet access at our place of work. I can check the sports scores or something at lunch. If you're working for some of these folks, you're working in a factory, you are stripped of all digital device. Even if you have a internet-enabled phone, you have no access to the internet during the day or during your work hours, whatever those might be. So it's at home. In the library, again, it's not convenient for everybody, and it's a very limited access. So it's at home. Yeah, and it's not cheap. So. Right there. Yeah.
Kind of related. It was really interesting and fascinating. And I just, I saw several times pop up the term digital citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering how you define that and how you're understanding.
Yeah, I think we're going to come up with another word because I've seen it used. I mean, we've been using it for a couple of years as we've been doing the research, and for us, it really does speak to that notion of, can you be a full participant in your city, in your country, without ready access to digital tools, or rather, digital tools are shaping what it means to be a citizen, or what the potentiality of being a full citizen. Unfortunately, it also gets blurred with like digital literacy, and I've even seen the term used by some schools about students not posting pornographic photographs on their on Facebook or something. You should be a good digital citizen. So I think our meaning is getting a little bit blurred. But for us, it is about how the high-rise shapes, even with or without looking at digital technology, how the high-rise shapes how you experience the city, and how you live your life. And now there's this this online life that complicates things further. Right there.
Aside from the example of the playground being built, are there many other stories of where these reimagined spaces get applied?
It's slow in coming. I mean, what's surprising about Toronto is that sometimes people think of these buildings as sort of public housing, but I think something like 80% of the apartment buildings in Toronto are privately owned. And that building is privately owned. So it was sort of enlightened management that got involved, but it is slow in coming. I mean, I think some things in the city just they take a long time. Or there was a very elaborate, the Tower Renewal Plan was a sort of public-private partnership to reclad these buildings, to rezone the areas around the bottom so you could have shops and things that, like, people have, they're obviously, everybody knows in these buildings, the guy on the 18th floor is the barber. There's somebody selling cigarettes on the third floor. You know, there's all this informal economy because it's strictly illegal. There can't be any commercial activity in the building. So part of tower renewal is to sort of enliven those spaces by changing all of those. The original Transit City plan was to connect the, you know, it's again, I'm trying not to be political here, but you know, it's great to talk about subways. There is never going to be a subway along Finch Avenue. It's just not in our lifetimes. So there's no point talking about it. There was a plan to have streetcars or LRTs, you know. So it's slow in coming. It's very slow in coming. But I really believe that, and I think this speaks to the power of sometimes the simple power of documentary in any form, as with Thousands of Towers, just photographs and audio. You get an audience. Like those, you know, if those 4 or 5 folks came to City Hall and said, "Hi, we're here. We'd like to meet with the mayor and talk about our concerns," you know, it's not going to happen. I mean, there are photo ops where things like that happen, but because the National Film Board kind of was the framing organization and they had stories to tell, they had the rapt attention of 300 people. And so I think, you know, media can be used. We're not in the business of fomenting for social change. We're a government agency, so we're kind of giving people a voice and we're a bit of a catalyst for discussion. But I think there can be more use of these digital tools to kind of affect change, for people to really understand what life is like inside these places. And I hope positive change would come from that. But not a lot. There's still, a lot of these places are still very bleak places to live. Like, a lot of us lost power during the ice storm. That building, you know, the elevators are out for 48 hours on a regular basis. So you're 80 years old and you're living on the 25th floor and you have no elevators. Like, that's a regular experience. And it's not even just about beautifying the area around. It's like, can the basic infrastructure work? So, anybody else? Everybody hungry? Sure.
So when you and Katerina were interacting with people living in high-rises in different parts of the world, did you get a sense of what to live in a high-rise meant, and perhaps those meanings were different, or the meaning of living in a high-rise resonated differently in Sao Paulo as opposed to Toronto? Because I think when either people in Toronto, people outside Toronto, they imagine Toronto,
Right.
They imagine Canadian identity. It's about living in your home, imagined as a single-family home, and it's not a high-rise.
Right.
And that's kind of an image of being from that nation.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that disconnect between high-rise residents as like real Canadians has other versions that might be.
It does. I mean, we found just in telling all these stories, and we'll probably have had some images or stories from, you know, more than 100 cities by the time we're all done, that we were seeing connections that we hadn't thought about. You know, that there were, like, out my window, there's a community high-rise building in Istanbul where the people in the building, it's kind of a guerrilla operation in a way, in a positive way. They've added floors to the building, you know, so it's like, let's go up to the top of our building, let's build another floor or 2 or 7. But there's also a building in Sao Paulo that is the largest squat in South America. And so the community runs the building. You know, there's one story we told in Johannesburg where buildings are hijacked. Like, criminal gangs took over the building, stripped all of the pipes, all of the wires, all of the infrastructure. So you're now living in this hollow shell, and the gang shows up and wants you to continue to pay rent. And so we started seeing all these kind of connections. And so, as I think Kat said in a quote there, you know, there are often people in those communities maybe have more in common with, you know, their suburban counterparts in Toronto than people in downtown Toronto do with people in downtown Paris or something, you know. So there isn't obviously a single high-rise life. In some of the stories we're covering in Mumbai, they're middle class or upper middle class condos or buildings in which there's no water. Water is, you have to buy the water, and there's a kind of criminal operation in providing that water. Like, you can't even take for granted that it's there. So it's, you know, I think we're not trying to make this beautiful, but I think we're trying to sort of redeem the high rise, or at least say it's a reality. You know, there are obviously people say they're ugly, we should get rid of them, or we should come up with something else. They're not going away. And so we want to sort of, you know, sort of honor the lives of people who live in them and reflect the reality of what they are, and maybe have some of them, you know, encourage people to think about their fuller potential in that way. They just are where people live, where billions of people live. And so I think, you know, we'll see where that connective tissue takes us. We're actually working on a final project to take all of the assets we created for Highrise, which includes thousands of photographs and other material that we haven't used, to knit them together into a kind of tablet-based experience that may allow you to draw those connections that even we're not seeing. So, okay, feel the end. There's one back there.
I know that it's somewhat of a non-question, given that we are sitting in the shadow of one of the tallest high-rises just around here.
Right, right.
And it raises an interesting question for me about, and there's a lady here in the room who I met on the subway, and I'm very thankful she's here, who was doing a course in community. I hope you don't mind. I don't mind at all. And I met her on the subway, and we just started talking. And I realized that she is doing a course in community organization at Ryerson at Chan School, and Pam is right here.
Right.
Because she's living in a high-rise and she wants to organize the community
Right.
in her high-rise. And I was just thrilled about it. But here is an example of my experience as a new Canadian living in a high-rise, is that there are a lot of older Canadians
Mm-hmm.
choosing to live in those high-rises, as well as high-rise living as a preferred lifestyle by the young Canadians, not just new Canadians.
Right.
So the choice of going to Kipling and choosing a certain kind of population which lives in that kind of a suburb
Mm-hmm.
is a partial depiction of who is a Canadian,
Right.
what is connectivity, what is citizenship, because if you're talking about becoming Canadian and connecting to downtown, which is, by the depiction it seems, is considered as Toronto,
Mm-hmm.
which I always have issues with when I'm traveling in a subway and people tell me Toronto for me ends at Bloor, for some it ends at
Right.
Eglinton, for some it is just the downtown core. It is very interesting to me as someone trying to be a part of the global cities, as what do we then see as the city doing its bit to make Canadians, new Canadians, Canadian.
Mm-hmm.
So if, for instance, if the laptop or the internet is a window to home, then what is the reverse window to this home
Mm-hmm.
that is available or thought of?
Right.
You know, so it is so a range of questions as I was looking
Sure.
at it, because I've been involved in similar projects in Delhi, which is again an immigrant city in a way. It's a metropole and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And there's more of internal migration and similar questions of who belongs, who's trying to, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a fascinating set of questions that come to me because I also work with these communities through my my research and my profession.
Right.
And sorry to just.
No. I mean, I think the place to start, and one of our goals is we just have to understand where we live. We have to understand what Toronto, to start with, actually is. And again, to this day, when we say, Toronto is more high-rises than pretty much, it's like, where are they? Because it's not Shanghai. They're not all up and down Yonge Street from Bloor to Queen. There'd be 1,000 buildings if there were. It would look like, the future. So we have to, and I really believe that's what documentary, in some ways, the web work can do, is just for us to even understand there's so many misconceptions. I grew up in Toronto, and I still have a very powerful mental map of certain sections of the city, and others are kind of vague, and Dufferin is sort of over there somewhere, and I don't know who lives there. That I think as citizens and as media makers and as students and storytellers, we have to understand that first and express that. We've told many stories in this project, many more than a traditional documentary would tell, but there are obviously many that are left untold. So part of this project is also putting storytelling tools, digital storytelling tools, in the hands of people who formerly would never have thought to tell their stories or wouldn't have the way to get those stories out. I think the High-Rise too, for anybody doing community organizing or trying to connect people who've just arrived and are living in a high-rise wherever it is in the city. We've met people at sort of Christie and DuPont, and it's right in the center of the city. Is that it doesn't lend itself to, you don't talk over your backyard fence, you're not sitting on your front porch. All of those tools of community connection on the street level that someone like Jane Jacobs wrote about, those are removed with the high-rise. So how can they be better designed? How can we better connect people? I think some of it is design. Certainly when we started at Kipling, people in the building didn't know each other. They came together because we were having a media workshop in the community room, the little community room downstairs. So I'm not saying it was our presence that brought them together, but there needs to be some kind of catalyst. You know, it's very, very hard, and particularly when the population is so much in flux that people are coming and going. They don't stay in, some people have been in those buildings for 10 years, some are there for 3 months, and they move on somewhere else. Very hard to get a sense of who your neighbors are. Sorry, right there.
I'm the lady from the subway.
You're the lady from the subway.
And I would like to suggest that somebody should do this kind of project with condominiums.
Right.
I can tell you that people in my building generally live there by choice.
Right.
And organizing within the building is the easy part.
Mm-hmm.
The hard part is that the Condominium Institute does not teach, support any aspect of community life. It emphasizes the legal and particularly liability issues. So, for example, property managers and lawyers are always telling people about rules and liability. And that's a great stumbling block to the building of community.
Sure.
We're not organizing just within our building, we are reaching out to others because this is a bigger issue than just one building.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, I think anything that brings people together and gives them more tools. I mean, you think about the importance of public space in a city that's, you know, there's 1 million people moving into this city in the next 20, 30 years. They're not going to be living in bungalows, you know, they're going to be living in high-rises. And, you know, Frank Gehry's planned 3 85-story buildings at King and John. You know, you can say that's a bad thing. I mean, there will be a 100-story building in Toronto, I'd say, in the next 5 to 7 years. Like, you can say that's a bad thing. It's better than sprawl. But, you know, that puts so much more pressure, all these people living in condos, on public space. You know, that spaces that people can share. If they live in a 300, if you look in our New York Times project, we talk also about these sort of micro apartments, you know, 250 square feet. You know, that's coming here too. And so it's, you know, the part of the thesis that Kat put forward is the condominium, high-rise housing used to be a tool of public policy. You know, people need to be housed properly. There was a great optimism after World War II. We'll build all this public housing. The population is booming. People need a clean, safe, you know, proper place to live. And so much of that dream kind of crumbled. The condominium is in some ways is a tool of financial speculation. It's something else. You know, there are apartment buildings in New York that, you know, and Toronto now, where, you know, a penthouse is $20–30 million. No one lives in them. Those buildings are empty. They're offshore investors who are investing in them. What does that do for community when these towers are empty? They're simply financial places to park my $20 million. So again, we're just trying to peel back some of what is actually going on here, but we're not journalists, so we're doing it through human stories, and I think there's always room for more, and these many forms of documentary allow many more stories than be told. If we could only make a 1-hour documentary about high-rises, it would be an infinitesimal fraction of what's in this project, and that, you know, that's not enough.
It's around about 2, so I know that probably some students may need to go to their next class. We have the room for longer, so if people need to go, don't be shy to go. But if you want to stay for, say, another 10 minutes of conversation, if Jerry still has it in him, then we can do that. So we have a little bit of flexibility.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you. Thanks very much. Nice to meet you. No problem.